One cool thing about running a business these days is the opportunity to have your employees work remotely, even your sales team.
Oh, Joel Yee joins us now. He's the CEO of Joel Yee LLC, a company in his same name. He's here to share the impact and advantages of an efficient remote team. And this is so timely. I love this conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Absolutely. I mean, remote teams have become a thing of the present for sure.
Yes,
and you wanted to talk about how you can actually design a sales team remotely to be highly successful.
Absolutely. So the four things that we talk about when designing these sales teams is, I call it the C4 explosive framework. And that is essentially, I'm in the military, so I like bombs and explosives. So C4 would be contrarian compensation, making sure that comp plans are not flat so we can design attractive incentives. And then having the right culture, because no one wants to work for a terrible, toxic environment, right? So let's say, so like great environment, great culture, making sure that we got constant recruitment so that people are always coming in the door. So the current sales professionals on your team have, we call it a fire lit under the bum, so they know how to perform. And then lastly, consistent coaching. So these four things are what we do to design a virtual sales force.
Wow, very cool. So Joel, how can businesses equip their sales reps to thrive remotely?
Yeah, so with the 4 C's I mentioned, that's one thing, but also being willing to be great leaders and listen, because the difference I find working in an on-the-floor, in-person sales team versus virtual is that when you're in person, you have a lot more communication with your manager, with your leaders, with your team. But when you're virtual and you're at home or you're in an office somewhere else and you're just on the phone all day or on Zoom, on web conferencing tools, you don't get the luxuries of being able to reach out to your team or your manager. So I think leadership or leaders can then reach out more and be more right in front of their team by just saying, hey, how are you doing? Like, can I help you with this objection? Let me listen to some of your calls. Let me play that back. Let me give you some feedback. Doing that.
Well, it's interesting you bring up technology because
Yes.
I think, no matter how you do it, you want to connect with the people that you're working with.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yes.
But technology literally comes into play when we're talking about remote work. We all know that.
Right.
I mean, I
Yes.
remember downloading Zoom on my phone for the first time in
time.
2020.
Yeah, right before the pandemic, probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, I
absolutely.
think March of 2020, actually.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
how important is technology to all this?
I say we use it to make sales, to make revenue. Technology helps you make more deals. I still remember back in the day, this was like 5 years ago, before we started using web tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, we did sales on the phone. Still virtual, but on the phone. And it was okay, but then what we realized is you couldn't actually leverage body language and your hand gestures and facial expressions, right? Which are really 55% of communication. So imagine not having that and just using your voice. I mean, after we went on Zoom, we never went back because now we have the full powers of everything.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it's so interesting because as advanced as this could be, right, with technology and being able to connect with anybody, anywhere, it still is not without its challenges.
Right.
So what are some of the challenges you see when it comes to having a sales team remotely?
I think the biggest thing, like I talked about, was really not having that face-to-face communication and getting feedback as quickly as you like. So some of my colleagues in the in-person sales world, when they have in-person sales, one of the best things they could do is actually literally sit next to a sales professional when they're making calls and give them in-the-ear feedback. Like they listen and then they tell them what to say next. We can't do that. There is very great technology that allows you to listen in calls, but for the most part, we're missing sort of that immediate feedback and face-to-face comms. And I would say that's a drawback. But the benefit is that you could literally work anywhere in the world and get great results, right? And be
Right.
super flexible with that.
For any business owners out there or even managers, do you have any advice on how do you measure the success of your
Yeah.
remote teams?
Yeah, it's the same thing as you would do for an in-person team. So we track metrics, the same things like number of appointments booked, number of daily activities, outbound calls, emails, texts. We track conversion rate, show-up rate. So as long as we're tracking metrics, it'll be the same way in both senses. And as long as you can track and measure, then you can make changes to increase performance.
Wow, that is so interesting. And I think we all can benefit from just understanding that because that's really the language and scope of what our world is today, is being able to connect just from wherever we are.
Yes.
Well, and we didn't even talk about the advantages for the workers of many people, especially women with children, are really finding it incredible to work from home, and they're being very productive. So,
Yeah,
It's huge.
so there's
absolutely.
there's benefits all
that's
around.
huge, yeah.
Great to have you in.
Thanks so much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you so
time.
much.
Yeah,
It's a
of
pleasure.
course.
If you would like to connect with Joel Yee and learn more about how sales professionals can thrive remotely, visit his website, joelyee.com, right there on your screen.